Hello, and welcome to the Mik One podcast, where I sit down with industry leaders to discuss the project to product movement. I'm Mik Kirsten, founder and CEO of Tasktop and best-selling author of Project to Product: How to Survive and Thrive in the Age of Digital Disruption with the Flow Framework. Today, I'm pleased to announce my new role as CTO, or Chief Technology Officer, of Planview. By now, you may have heard the exciting news about Tasktop joining Planview as we officially announced the acquisition at the beginning of July. Throughout our 6-year partnership, I've been incredibly impressed watching Planview grow to become a leader in enterprise agile planning and strategic portfolio management, while modernizing all things around project portfolio management. Tasktop created and leads the value stream management category and has been spearheading the shift from project to product around all things flow. We've been able to play an outsized role in helping some of the largest enterprises transform, but it's this new combination that will dramatically accelerate our ability to help the world's organizations survive and thrive in the age of software. Transforming industries is all about coming together with like-minded people, and what brought Tasktop and Planview together is none other than Razat Gaurav, an individual whose team I could not be more happy to join. Razat joined Planview in 2021 as CEO with over 20 years of experience in the enterprise software space, driving innovation-based growth and scaling up technology businesses. He's a trusted advisor to leading executives, boards, and investors on topics related to digital transformation initiatives and has been recognized by Goldman Sachs as one of the 100 most intriguing entrepreneurs of 2020. He's also engaged in various philanthropic and policy initiatives related to medical research, STEM education across minorities, and efforts to reduce carbon emissions. So with that, I'm thrilled to have Razat here by my side to tell you about his journey and the great work that lies ahead. Razat, welcome to the Project to Product podcast. It is great to have you here. And I think a lot of our audience might have heard about the announcement of Planview acquiring Tasktop. We're not going to get into the details of that, but I think we are going to talk about some of the history that led to this, some of the ways that the market has evolved, and why we see the combination of these approaches, these ways of thinking as so critical to accelerating digital transformations and helping companies navigate this increasingly tricky climate. But before we get into any of that, I would just love for people to hear some of the history and some of your background, your accomplishments with what you shared with me early on, almost a year ago now, where you took me through the way that supply chain management, planning, execution evolved, so some of your early involvement, because I think whenever we chat about this topic, and I just realized how we're just basically stuck in some very early phase of our infancy in terms of how digital and software work versus the kinds of things that you were used to seeing in the previous parts of your career. So why don't you, if you could just take us back to some of those early days of I2, maybe Blue Yonder, and just to take us through some of your history, some of your learnings.
Sure, Mik. Thanks for having me. It's fun to be doing this podcast with you. Yeah, like you and I discussed, I think it was back in Seattle almost a year ago. I grew up in the software and technology space, building supply chain planning and execution systems, right, for over 20 years. And through those years, went through a lot of learning cycles, but a lot of the inspiration behind the early systems and processes and thought processes in making supply chain decisions happen was heavily influenced by the work of Eli Goldratt, right, and his theory of constraints. Supply chains, when we're thinking of product flows, when you're thinking of manufacturing, production, logistics, warehousing, distribution, fulfillment, it's a very complex, multivariate environment, right? And you're dealing with all kinds of constraints and bottlenecks. And Eli Goldratt's work was heavily influenced in some of the early systems that created constraint-based planning paradigms for the shop floor, the factory, for manufacturing, right? And that extended itself to the broader supply chain network as well. So that's where I grew up, and we built systems that were designed to bring efficiency, productivity, and supply chain systems were one of the early users of mixed integer programming and linear programming using optimization techniques, right, to help make smarter and better decisions. The number of variables you have is highly complex. And also, as a result of that, it's also highly variable, right? And as a result of that, in the last, I would say, 5 to 7 years, there's been a lot of usage and a lot of practical applied use cases of using machine learning techniques, reinforcement learning techniques in helping some of those predictions and those decisions happen. Right. So that's my background, and I grew up in that space. Of course, when I started, right out of college, I got into management consulting, and that was in some ways a continuation of university, right? And then I joined I2, a company called I2 Technologies out of Dallas, that was a pioneer in supply chain planning and execution systems. And I was a product manager. I was a rookie product manager. I think I'm still a recovering product manager in some ways. And got into that, and then played a variety of roles across an 11-year time frame at I2. And we went through a lot of learnings in that time frame. Did a lot of amazing things, but also made a lot of mistakes, right? And learned a lot, in those years, and worked with a very, very smart group of people who were just brilliant. I just was very fortunate to have that opportunity. And then from there, we sold I2 to a company called JDA, which is now called Blue Yonder. I spent another 7 to 8 years there in various leadership roles. Expanded beyond my product management early days into more the go-to-market function, more general management functions. And then it led me to my first CEO position at a company called Lamasoft. Lamasoft was out of Ann Arbor, Michigan, another sort of pioneer in taking the whole notion of supply chain design and analytics to a different level. And that's where, that's also both I2 and Lamasoft had a very strong data science, what we call data science today, what, previously was called operations research, where using data and algorithmic techniques algorithmic techniques could be simulation, optimization, machine learning, in making smarter and more intelligent business decisions for the customers, right? And I just love building products. I just love the magic of software. It still amazes me that a company like Planview, we have the same product that gets used by hundreds and thousands of different companies across tens of different industry verticals, but it's the same code base, right? And it still applies to a bank as much as it applies to a manufacturer, as much as it applies to a retailer or an insurance company or a pharmaceutical company. I'm still amazed by that. It's so amazing that you can have one product that can be so widely and broadly valuable, just like Tasktop, right? And so that's my background, and I'm still on that learning journey, and I'm really excited about the next phase in continuing that learning journey with you.
That's excellent. As am I. And I, when we first met, I vividly recalled Mike Satterfield. He was our first institutional investor from Yaletown Partners. And we were looking at raising our Series A, and he said, look, what you need to do with the opportunity that you have, and he'd worked, by the way, with I2, the opportunity that you've got is to do for software and value streams and digital what I2 did for supply chain. So could you just take us a bit more through that? Because I think so many listeners have, they've studied Goldratt. Obviously, a lot of the literature in the Agile and DevOps space is really derivatives of Goldratt's work. But again, the way that you talk about it, the way that it is really so grounded in data analytics and these solutions that you created as part of that entire movement. Could you just take us through how some of that worked, how some of it came to be, and really, I think what we're going to see is a lot of what you've already done repeating itself now for technology. So it'd be great to hear your perspective on how that evolved through your tenure there.
Yeah, I think there are a lot of parallels, frankly, that I think we can learn from, and of course, there's some nuances and specifics that are different when we talk about digital transformation or the business of software development or delivery or transformation on a broader scale. But look, I think it starts with really understanding the flow, right? In supply chains, as you're talking about the flow of products in one direction, but also the flow of information in both and every direction, right? So there's demand that's flowing from customers or customer's customer upstream, right? And that's a demand signal, a unit of demand, and then you're trying to make the product available either as a manufacturer or as a retailer or as a distributor, and you're trying to position the product in a way that it can fulfill the demand. I mean, so the essence of supply chain management is about balancing and matching demand with supply, right, in the most profitable way possible, in the most efficient way possible, right? That's the simplest way I can dumb it down in simple English. And so when we built our systems, we realized the real world was a lot more complex than that simplistic representation, right? Because you've got a plethora of different functions in an organization involved, right? And you've got people who are in sales and marketing that are typically the ones that are providing that demand signal from the customer, right? You've got people, who are doing the sourcing of the raw materials of component parts, people who are doing the manufacturing and production, you have people who are actually moving the products and so on and so forth, right? So all these are different functions, and just like in any organization, you've got functional silos, right? So while each function can be optimized, in reality, that product flow sometimes under delivers, significantly, because you're not looking at the end-to-end supply chain across those functions, right? I think you'll probably identify with that same problem that exists when it comes to development flows, or flow of value, or flow of work, right? In a more general context as well. The first thing we had to do was to realize that we need to build a data layer that needs to have some notion of a semantic, right, that allows these different functions to kind of talk the same language, and to be able to have one version of the truth, and to have the ability to get some level of transparency and visibility across these functions, right? And so again, a lot of parallels to the work that you've been doing, and of course the work that we're doing now at Planview as well together. And then like in any kind of network or flow situation, you've got lots of different constraints, right? Constraints could be, in the supply chain world, could be constrained in how much can you manufacture, or what's your raw material availability, or a constraint could be how much can you process through a warehouse, or how many dock doors do you have for receiving and shipping products, right? Just like you have constraints in when you're thinking about the flow of work or flow of software, right? Development. You've got constraints in terms of resources, and especially those resources and that have a certain capacity for a certain skill set. You've got constraints in terms of capital. Sometimes no organization in the world has infinite capital and resources, right? So part of what we had to do as we were building these systems and helping mid-size and large organizations really optimize their supply chains, was to get the data right, to get a common language that they could communicate across these functions, and be able to have a clear representation of these constraints, these operational constraints, right? Because as decisions are being made, the difficulty is that if you don't have a constraint-based paradigm, you end up with a very theoretical depiction that you can't operationalize in the real world, right? So that's how we build these systems over time. And of course, there wasn't one system that did everything. We had logical modules that kind of mapped, but again, with a common underpinning of data, visibility, and decision sciences, right? And the other thing I'll point out is that in supply chains, there's some added complexities, because the dependencies are not only on these functional silos that exist within the organization, you're also dependent on third parties who are trading partners. So think of like a Procter and Gamble moving their products, right? They're dependent on the carriers. Could be over the road trucking carriers, could be ocean container carriers, you're dependent on your suppliers. Think of the automotive industry. They're highly dependent on their tier one and tier two suppliers, right? And so similarly on the other end of the supply chain, you're dependent on your customers and your customers' operations. So the dependencies and the impacts are obviously complicated enough within your own organization with all the functional silos we talked about, but also they get compounded with all these external exogenous factors as well, right? But doing all of that while having that objective function of, how do you do that at the least cost with the least amount of inventory, but the highest level of service, right? I mean, that's ultimately the business outcome that you're trying to achieve, right? And so all the decisions and all the systems we built had the notion of a certain service level in the supply chain world leads to like on-time delivery performance, right? Or like if I'm a tire manufacturer like Michelin, can I guarantee 2-day service to any customer in the world, right? Or do I need to do that across every customer because that's going to be very expensive? Maybe I need to segment my customer. So segmentation becomes a very important technique. And for each segment of the customer base, I have a different service level approach to and then I orient and design a supply chain that is helping me achieve those service levels. And then with those service levels in place, how do I minimize the amount of inventory I need to carry on my balance sheet, because that leads to cash flow, and how do I do that in the most profitable way, meaning minimum in terms of operating costs. So that's how we build these systems. And look, that journey continues. I mean, look how the supply chains were challenged during the pandemic, right? I mean, it was just a big shock to the system, and every weak link in the supply chain got exposed. When you had such an exogenous, explosion to the system, and so, but in many ways it kind of reinforces the need to focus on those fundamentals, and the fundamentals need to be designed with resiliency in mind, with variability in mind, and I think that evolution is going to continue as we go forward, much like the evolution is going to continue in how companies think about their flow of work, how they think about their approach to digital transformations. And again, many of these organizations that are working on these transformation journeys, they are not sitting on an island somewhere. They are highly impacted by exogenous factors. I mean, right now we're dealing with all these inflationary pressures, right? I mean, here in the US, we haven't lived in such a high inflationary environment in a very long time. Sometimes, there are generations of people in the workforce today that have never, and that's impacting, all kinds of business priorities, and it's impacting, how you need to strategically align yourself with the new market realities, and that's going to impact the way we think about transformations, the way we think about investing in digitalization and those journeys. So, and I think there's a lot of parallels here. I can keep going on, but I'll stop here. But hopefully that gives you a little bit more sense.
It does. It's just there's so many parallels, and then what's concerning to me is a lot of the lacks of parallels, right? Where I know my experience in terms of just understanding how sophisticated and effective this has become in supply chain management came from I told the story in Project to Product when I was physically witnessing at the BMW Leipzig plant, not only just-in-time delivery where the trucks are dropping off parts at exactly the point in the assembly line where they're going to get consumed. It's just-in-sequence manufacturing across 30,000 suppliers. So how it just was mind-boggling to me how managing that, and again, across multiple tiers of suppliers as well. So it was just completely mind-boggling to me how, that the carbon fiber in the iCars at the time was coming from Oregon and it was actually being properly supplied, and the plant just kept running. And of course, how resilient a lot of these organizations were to those disruptions. So and then I would then go talk to a technology executive, someone responsible for a multi-billion-dollar IT budget, ask a question, where's your constraint? And it was like I was speaking a foreign language because there was not that understanding of constraints and how they're in these bottlenecks and how these are the most critical things to manage. So I think the common thing I see is when you look at, so I assume when you were working with leaders back then, the solutions that IT were was providing these common data layers with a common language and semantics. This is something that was it a part of sort of day-to-day work to be looking at these reports, at these dashboards? How did it work back then? Because somehow this accelerated how manufacturing works, and I just feel like we're still in the dark ages with software at scale.
Yeah, I think. Look, I think need and sort of necessity is the mother of all inventions, as they say, right? And supply chains had to become more advanced and sophisticated, right? And I mean, if you think about it, you talked about like BMW or like an automotive industry, right? Like there's 30,000 component parts that go into making a vehicle. Over 30,000 component parts, right? And by the way, every one of them has to be in place and come together at the right time before that car can roll off the shop floor, right? And it comes from tens of thousands of different suppliers, right? So because no automotive company, even though Tesla is a little bit more vertically integrated, they still have hundreds and thousands of different suppliers that are providing those different component parts, right? And so in order for General Motors or Ford or BMW or Volkswagen to really build a business at scale, there was no way for them to do that without really getting more advanced in their thinking of leveraging data, in creating that synchronization across their own supply chain, but also with their value chain, right? And in being able to use sophisticated mathematical modeling to help with synchronizing the supply chain. The just-in-time delivery models are fascinating. Another industry where there's a lot of science that has come into is retail, right? I mean, you look at someone like a Walmart, the scale of their operations are such where they give dog door appointment times to their carriers within a 15-minute window.
Really? Wow.
Right? So think about all the variability, and things are moving across the country, across the globe, across the ocean. There are multiple handoffs and different third parties involved, and they give their suppliers a 15-minute window that they have to be able to deliver their product to their warehouse, the Walmart warehouse, within a 15 to 30-minute window, right? And these products are coming from a plethora of locations. So you can't do that just kind of by winging it, right? You can't just do that on the fly, and you can't do that just in manual ways. You need sophisticated systems and data and synchronization and data science to come together to facilitate that. I mean, you look at someone like an Amazon, right? Amazon, if you remember when they started offering the 2-day service, right? They guarantee that they'll be able to deliver within 2 days. It was a big thing, right? Then they said, okay, you know what? We'll guarantee you on a bunch of merchandise or their products that they sell next day. That was a paradigm shift. They go guaranteeing next day. Then they came to same day, right? We were like, are you crazy? Same day. And then now, in Austin or Chicago or Vancouver, they've got the whole Prime Now where they guarantee within 2 hours, right? So if I'm cooking a meal this evening, you order the what you need early in the evening or in the afternoon, and with 99.9% delivery performance or delivery reliance, they'll be on time, in full, with the right quantities at your doorstep. Now, think about what kind of a supply chain operation is required to deliver on that, right? So I think there's a lot we can learn from that when it comes to delivering, technology solutions in the market. And at the end of the day, we have to leverage the data that exists, right? I mean, and by the way, in the development of technology solutions, it's not that there's no data. There's plenty of data. It's just not very usable.
And it's not. It's not used. This is the fascinating thing: is the data is so rich, right? We've got data down to when you actually look at the data that's in these organizations, you've got can almost get to like minute-long time slices of developers, of other people touching these artifacts, building features, fixing defects and incidents and outages and so on.
Right.
And yet the data doesn't get used. And contrasting that with what you're saying, where it's actually they're used for optimization, for simulation, for some of these things that you've told me about, I'd like you to touch on. It is just amazing how, again, the opportunity that we have for optimizing software value streams, for understanding software value streams, rather than having one thing go wrong. Let's say like Log4j happened in December. It's like the world's software value streams ground to a halt. Like, we can't imagine an event, even through what's happened the last 2 years, where every single manufacturing line on the planet just grinds to a halt, right? There's been this resilience that's come from the data, the optimization, and the understanding of the constraints.
But Mik, what I'll say is, I agree with you that the data exists, but it's a little bit like water, right? There's more water on this planet Earth than anything else, and there's yet not enough to drink, right? I look at data. A lot of people call data as the new oil. I think of data as really water, right? Because there's so much data. We're all swimming in data all over the place, but it's not curated. It doesn't have, a semantic layer that people can talk about the same data elements while using different tags and semantics in a cohesive way. And then the data is not synchronized in a way that it can be used to get visibility first, because that's the first layer. And that's part of what I'm so excited about what Tasktop is doing, because you guys have defined that semantic layer, right? When it comes to, developing and delivering technology solutions. And with that, you have a better chance, and you've got that. Obviously, you need to have the connected fabric to integrate into a plethora of systems to get that data, curate that with a common semantic layer. But then, with that visibility, now we can use data science techniques and do the smart stuff. Now we can add intelligence to it, right? Just like in the supply chains, right? Is we can start now using, whether it's and different techniques will lend themselves better to different types of use cases, whether it's simulation or optimization or machine learning techniques, to bring intelligence. But you can't bring intelligence without doing the heavy lifting in getting that water. Like, I'm sitting in Chicago today, and Lake Michigan is just outside my window here, and there's more water there, but it's not drinkable water. I've got to do something with that water, right? Before I can put it in my glass and drink it. And so it's the same thing with data. You got to get it in a shape and form and in a way that it can actually feed these intelligent algorithm-driven engines to do the smart stuff.
Yeah, and it is fascinating because a lot of these organizations, they've got their data lakes, and their data lakes are a whole bunch of dirty, undrinkable waters, as we all know, and the data warehouses. And I think it seems to me like the front office data, the sales and marketing data, the click streams and so on, there's a fair amount of maturity around, but all of the production, the portfolio data, how the financial data is connected, all of the development and delivery data, that's where it hasn't been done. So it would be actually good to just think back to how you did this, because you did mention with I2 you were actually reaching into sales and marketing data, right? You were connecting across these different silos. I obviously completely agree with you, Razat. We need to basically model that data and turn it into information. We can't just be drowning in data, and that's why so many organizations who've tried to dump all this development data warehouses, they're getting no analytics out that they would dare show to their leadership, right? Because they know there's not enough information there. So you said common semantics, you said a common model. It'd be great if you could just dig a little deeper for what worked, because it was pulled off then, and we need to do it now. So
and look, I think a lot of these data lake initiatives, I can understand why organizations embark on those journeys, right? And I've seen many companies around the world, and I've got great friends in many of those companies that have embarked these big data lake initiatives, right? But the majority of them, they don't deliver much. And what I've learned over time is the single biggest reason why they underdeliver is because the team that's working on these data lake initiatives has not taken the time up front to step back and really think about, how do you want to use this data? What are the types of decisions you want to make using that data? What types of outcomes are you trying to achieve, right? And companies, and organizations just go and jump on this big data lake bandwagon without taking the time to think about the business objectives that they want to address, right? Because most of those big bang data lake initiatives, they don't succeed, but the ones that do succeed, if you learn one of the common attributes you'll find in them are that they are very clear about what types of insights, decisions, business outcomes that they want to achieve. They've clearly defined those objectives very clearly, right? And then they've gone about curating the appropriate and relevant data in a sensible way, as opposed to a big bang. And then you have all this data, and then what do you do with it, right? So that's the first thing that I've learned. The second thing is the data needs to have context. What I mean by that is, based on, again, what types of insights or decisions or outcomes you're trying to achieve, you curate the data, but the data is not, the different elements of data, they're not sitting on different islands, right? You've got to also define, I'm going to use a big word here, you need to define the ontology, right? Part of it is having a common semantic layer. So you have a master data construct, right? So you're not using something like the same product that is depicted in 10 different ways in 9 different systems, right? You've got a common master data layer. So that's a semantic layer. But then the ontology defines how that product relates to all the other data elements around it. What is the interrelationship there, right? And look, this is the hard stuff. This is not easy, right? In my experience, Mik, right? But the prize, if you get it right, if you've really thought through up front what your objectives are and what kind of decisions and insights you're trying to gain, and you've framed the scope of that up front, and then you go about creating a common data layer around it with the right semantic layer, with the right context and ontology, man, that's what I want to drink all day long. You can do so much with it. Then you can feed those smart algorithms.
Yeah, that is exciting stuff. But you're saying to work backwards from the decisions that need to be supported at business level.
Yes. Because otherwise, a data lake without that kind of end objective or outcome in mind is typically not a very valuable. Then it's going to be like the Lake Michigan water.
Right, and I mean we've got technology executives with $100 million, multi-billion-dollar IT budget flying blind, who I believe, and I think you and I have had some conversations around, they're going to have to be making some difficult decisions over what we're likely to see in terms of the macroeconomic environment with potential contractions, recessions, and so on. So how do you, I guess, as a business leader, and in terms of the conversations that you have with your peers, how do you look at the kinds of decisions that organizations need to be able to make work at that strategic portfolio level, at the enterprise agile level, and in the end, in terms of maximizing flow through their value streams, where I think everyone's feeling capacity constrained already, and it could get worse?
Yeah, the first part is don't wait for the crisis to happen to really start framing out a lot of these foundational layers we just talked about. You've got to start that journey. If you haven't started that journey as an organization, you need to get on that bandwagon pretty quickly. But the journey is not to just adopt the next fancy hotshot technology, right? It's really, the journey starts with introspecting as an organization and as a leadership team. What are you trying to achieve, right? What are the types of decisions you're trying to drive? And look, that's not so straightforward. Somebody sitting in a dark room somewhere can't figure that out all on their own, right? That requires organizational alignment and discussion and debate and hashing out, right? That's the hard stuff that companies have to do. But doing that up front will really help you figure out and scope out what are the enabling technologies you're going to need. What are the enabling or the relevant data sets you're going to need, right? But that preparation, that work, to me, is very foundational and has to start. And if you've done that, right, the good news is when you have these exogenous, disruptions, or you have, times of uncertainty, like the one we are navigating through right now. No one knows right now, are we in a recession? Are we not in a recession? Are we in a slowdown? Are we not in a slowdown? How long is the slowdown going to last? no one knows. No one has a crystal ball, right? But if history has taught us anything, one of the most powerful techniques to navigate through this is what if scenario planning. But to do what if scenario planning, you require to have made the investment in the underlying capabilities, and part of that is this foundational layer of the relevant contextualized data, right? And of course, together with that, capabilities that help you run those scenarios in a rapid form and provide insights. Ultimately, I still see a lot of organizations making decisions from a gut feel, right? Or making decisions based on some hacked up, quick and dirty spreadsheet model, right? And look, in many situations that may be okay, right? But with the magnitude of change, the frequency of change that we're all experiencing, right? That's not enough anymore, right? You've got to make this a core competency. This is a muscle that is going to be essential for companies to survive and thrive going forward, right? And that's what we see some of the best in class companies really getting on that bandwagon, right? I mean, the fact that and what I envision is the companies that are making the investments in this area, that are developing the right foundational capabilities, that are going about it not just in terms of the fad, but from a first principles perspective of what is the decisions that I'm trying to make, what are the outcomes I'm trying to achieve. How am I going to now align my foundational capabilities, my technology investments, my portfolio of change initiatives? How am I going to align all of those together? How am I going to prioritize those? How am I going to deploy and allocate my finite resources and capital? Those are the kinds of companies that will, I think, pull far, far ahead of the rest of the pack, right? And by the way, all these things that I'm talking about, this is not just the responsibility of, the IT person. This is a business imperative, right? And by the way, the lines between business and so-called IT have blurred, right? You're seeing more and more organizations where the former CIO is now the CEO, right? Business is technology, technology is business, right? And so they have to come together in order to really transform and have, and really thrive in this go forward digital age. So another way of looking at this is, I think pace of change is not going to slow down. What we've seen in terms of change in the past 5 years is greater than what we saw in the previous 25, 30 years. And what we're probably going to see in the next 5 years is going to be far greater than what we've seen in the last 50 years, right? So this is no longer a nice to have capability, and I think it's a must have core competency no matter what industry you're in, whether you're in banking or insurance or retail or manufacturing or automotive or pharmaceutical or life sciences. Thinking through these strategic elements of the decisions and the outcomes you're trying to achieve, and aligning those with your technology and your broader transformation initiatives, and then preparing the foundational capabilities of data that surround it along the lines of what we talked about is very fundamental to the go forward enterprise.
I could not agree more. And it's just fascinating what happens when it's not in place. So I was working with a company during the pandemic, and I hadn't actually realized that they'd undertaken this decision. But because of this separation between the business and technology, and this lack of understanding of the economics of flow, they did one of the crazier things I've seen in terms of resource reallocation. They basically cut a person from one person from every team across hundreds of teams. And so, because again, they didn't understand some of those fundamental dynamics, which are somewhat similar for creative work to supply chains, but of course, it's actually people. It's teams that have to learn how to work together. They crippled every single team, instead of course, going to the parts of the organization where they were seeing the demand signals fall and making sure they actually focus the reallocations or any cuts that they need to make there. So Razat, what you're saying though is that the organizations that don't see this are the ones that are going to keep fundamentally making these kinds of mistakes, right? These categories of mistakes. Whereas the ones who can actually get the right kind of data, understand, and I guess I would like you to touch on this because The way you think about this, I found extremely helpful, is actually have an understanding of both capacity and of demand, right? Because I think so much of what's going on is there's no CEO out there of a technology company, of a bank that wants to become a more innovative technology provider that doesn't want great digital experiences. But there's no understanding. There isn't this data layer that's common across everything that's saying, okay, well, here's our current capacity. Here's where we're actually falling under piles of technical debt. Here's an opportunity where we can actually move faster in our portfolio. So can you just speak a bit to that in terms of this challenge that so many companies have right now, is that there's so much demand, but there's this demand capacity mismatch.
Yeah. I've spent the last 25 years of my life trying to balance demand with supply and capacity, right? And understanding the demand signals is really important because it's an input into any and all decisions, right? And I can talk to you a lot about just demand itself, right? Like because sometimes you talk to five people in the same organization on what they think the demand should be, you'll get six different answers,
Right.
right? And so thinking about how do you create a single view of demand across the enterprise in itself is a significant effort. And then balancing that with capacity and in knowledge work and technology solutions, obviously the biggest capacity that you're dealing with, constraint capacity you're dealing with, is resources and capital, right? And so doing that is always an ongoing thing. And then you've got something called timelines because not everything can be, if you had infinite time, thinking of the extreme, you could deliver anything and everything, right? But we don't have infinite time, and things are changing as we go through that infinite time. So you got to have those feedback and learning cycles and the ability to learn as you go along. But balancing demand with the capacity and supply of resources and capital, in my view, it has to be a continuous process, right? It cannot be just something that you do once a year or once a quarter, right? I mean, I see companies doing it on a monthly basis now, and some companies are doing it on a bi-weekly basis, so every other week, right? And because things are changing much more rapidly, right? But again, in order to do that effectively, you need to have invested in the underlying data foundation, right? And when you have that, and by the way, sometimes if some of the lead times you're working with are going to be very long, right? That's where demand is not just a fixed unit input, right? Demand is also variable, right? And there'll be some other external elements that will be variable as well. And so if I'm trying to develop a product, the lead time to develop that product is not going to be something I can deliver within 2 weeks or a month. It's going to be a longer investment because of an R&D cycle or whatever the case is, right? This is where using demand not just as a fixed deterministic input, but as a distribution curve, as a function, that's where simulation is a very, very potent technique in being able to model that out as you're trying to make decisions on how best to prioritize and allocate your capacity and your resources, right? So, and by the way, some companies do that very well, right? We've got examples like in the pharmaceutical industry, right? Their product life cycles are 10 years, just not their product life cycles, their R&D cycle times for developing certain products can be, up to 10 years because it's full of a lot of pure research work, but also research and development work, but also a lot of regulatory toll gates that they had to go through, right? In that, but they've got to make bets now for things that will not pan out till maybe 5, 10, 15 years from now, right? So that's where I think simulation and stochastic models are very potent, right? In trying to inform those decisions, because in that time frame, all the inputs that go into making that decision, they're not going to be deterministic. They're not going to be static, right? They're going to be changing over time. And that's where modeling those as variables or as functions with different distribution curves can be a very potent way a very smart way of making those decisions.
Right. And all of this should apply to what we're doing, right? If we're going to have increased capacity in terms of the let's say the developers we're hiring on, we should be able to actually get a simulation of what that's going to deliver and how it's going to help meet the demand curve. And again, if we could just properly model, visualize, quantify both demand, supply, and capacity for software value streams, we'd be there. So and Razat, I think that you and I have spent a lot of time thinking about, okay, how do we get there? How do we get this industry there? I love the fact that the vision that we built out for this, we're making public with these 3 waves. We'll link to some materials where you can read more about that. But just take us through those 3 waves, right? Because in the first wave, it is about getting more of that data, but then of course feeding that and the way that you've taught me to think about this in terms of driving that decision making, getting to that next stage of not just data but analytics, insights, and things like simulation, where we can actually play out scenarios of these extremely consequential things. We're affecting a lot of our staff, our customers, the viability and the future of our companies. So if you could take us through those 3 waves, I think it'd be great for for our audience here to hear that, because I think that is how we can start across the industry bringing about these changes.
Yeah, look, I mean, the exciting thing is, we've been on this journey. It's not like we're just starting this journey together, right? We've been on this journey now for several years. To me, the first wave is really in getting that data from the plethora of systems that are involved in that application development delivery lifecycle, right? And curating that in a way that you have that single pane of glass, or what I was talking about, that common semantic layer, which is part of your flow fabric that you've really developed the platform around, the Tasktop platform around, and being able to really have visibility into. I mean, I've run software businesses I've been in the software business for 25 years, and I can't tell you, every time when I'm dealing with our engineering and development team, there's always been a black hole, right? Where are we at in that life cycle? How do we measure? Are we doing well? Are we not doing well? What is the opportunity for improvement, right? You can't do any of that till you're able to bring all this data together from Jira and ServiceNow and Deo and a whole plethora of different systems, right? And so to me, wave 1 is taking that, right, and really being able to bring that to form in the context of technology solutions, in the context of software development initiatives. And most companies are investing in transformations. Most of these investments are taking on the shape of digital transformation, and a bigger share of wallet of digital transformation, no matter what industry you're in, is going into developing software, whether you're developing it in-house or you're contracting it out to a third party, right? So that's a growing share. And the reason why that is because companies are realizing that this needs to become a core competency. It's no longer just, somebody else's job to develop software. Even if you are a bank, if you're Goldman Sachs, you've got more software engineers than you have bankers, right? So software development has to become a core competency for a lot of these companies. So to me, that's all about wave 1, is to bring that single pane of glass and to provide and change that black box into something that you can see and have visibility to and measure and really see where you are in that journey of delivery of value with whatever you're trying to achieve, right? On those technology initiatives. So that's wave 1. Wave 2 to me is to really be able to take that, but also link it back, link that single pane of glass and visibility, again, still with the scope of digital transformations and technology solutions and software development delivery, but link it back to the planning elements, right? Because as things are happening, you've got to now that you have this visibility, what levers can you use, whether it's resources or capacity or even changing maybe all the way fundamentally your ultimate OKRs, right? Those things need to be fed off of this single pane of glass that you have now, that you've curated with this data, right? And doing that in a closed loop way, in a bi-directional closed loop way, just like the supply chain planning and execution systems did a few generations ago, is a massive opportunity, I see, right? And then wave three is to take the same constructs that we talked about in the context of technology solutions and digital transformation, software development, delivery, but apply that same flow fabric and that context to the broader flow of work that's happening in the enterprise, right? Companies are spending so much time and effort on all kinds of initiatives, right? And so many of them are so disconnected from each other. And in some cases, everyone is running hard and running fast to sometimes stay in the same place or go backwards. It's like Alice in Wonderland, you know? And so we have to get a hold of that. We've got to get, and the way to unlock that is to get visibility, much along the same lines that we talked about, and then to close the loop again with the planning layer, whether it's resource capacity planning or financial and funding or capital allocation planning, right? And close the loop. And to me, that's what will really help us move the needle forward, right? In a dramatic way. Because the shortcoming is not, any company can create a very elegant strategy. And most companies do, right? Most large and small size companies, they create an elegant strategy and beautiful charts, well thought out, sometimes even well socialized, right? The challenge is not in creating the strategy. The challenge is in achieving the business outcomes and delivering and operationalizing those strategies. That's where the big gap is. And in my vision, and this is sort of like what you and I have talked about, make us like wave three, is if we're able to apply the same flow fabric and connect the dots and provide that visibility, that single pane of glass to the broader scope of work that's being done in the enterprise, and link it back to the resource and capital allocation decisions you're making, I think we have the opportunity to really move the needle in companies achieving the outcomes that they want to achieve, right? In a way that I think can completely change the underlying architecture of how these companies function. And that's what excites us all about this combination.
Well, and Razat, I think you also said to provide the feedback cycles to that strategy, right? Because I think you did mention how critical, especially in changing markets, macro environments, and so on, those fast feedback cycles are, right? So somehow making sure, yeah.
Yeah, it's so key because typically companies come up with a 3-year or a 5-year strategic plan, right? Well, the world changes very dramatically in that time frame, and by the way, it's not changing only 3 years from now; it's changing every month, every quarter, every year, right? And so one of the underlying design principles in how you're going to be operationalizing and achieving these outcomes is to have those feedback loops and those learning cycles. That's to me is very fundamental. It's something that is fundamental to an initiative or a product of any shape, size, or scale, right? Is that notion of closing the loop with those feedback cycles.
Yeah, amazing. And I think this is how we'll get the industry there. And I think that the story you and I shared recently of just how powerful it is when this is happening, right? When Tesla's seeing a supply chip shortage, realizing that the demand signal for lumbar support chips is not that high, that they can repurpose those chips for elsewhere in the car, and all of this is updated in the software and the software platform, and then the assembly line nearly overnight. Is can we just please get that to the world's software enterprises? And I think these 3 waves are exactly how we'll do that. So amazing.
Absolutely.
So Razat, this is again, I think just kind of so much inspiration. I do think you do give me hope that we'll get there in years, not decades, and that we'll be able to prove out a lot of these concepts in months and not years. So anything else to share in terms of people wanting these solutions now? So
yeah, what I'll say is, look, this is going to be a journey. Rome wasn't conquered in a year, and we are not going to sort of reimagine and rebuild the future of how the enterprise works, how work happens in the enterprise overnight. But the journey is important, and the prize at the end of the tunnel is so big, right? And it's, obviously we're pursuing it, but I'd encourage the entire industry to pursue this, right? The opportunity is big, and the time is now to embark on this journey. And I'm just so excited that we're going to be working on it together, hand in hand. And that's what gets me up every day in the morning, excited, and it's because the opportunity is big, the prize is big, and the impact this can have on so many fronts is so massive.
Yeah, no, it is amazing. You just make me remember when I recall Jeffrey Moore mentioning, like, always look for the next $1 trillion problem. And what we've done is measured companies' value streams, seen that more than half of them are waste and wait states. So there's $1 trillion of value somewhere to be unlocked here as we move through these waves.
Yeah, I mean, if you just put some numbers, just look at any numbers, like latest projections I saw from IDC is over $7 trillion is getting invested on just digital transformations globally, right? It's a big, even if you don't believe that number, cut it in half.
Yeah.
It's still a big number,
yeah.
Right? And oh, by the way, over 70% of those digital transformation initiatives, they don't deliver the ROI. And so envision, so to your point, there's a lot of waste. Just like in supply chains, there's a lot of waste. We throw away so much food, right? And yet people are dying of hunger, right? And that happens because of the supply-demand imbalances. Similarly, in the flow of work and in the flow of software development and technology development, right? There's a lot of waste. And I think as we think about a world that's more sustainable, a world that, we can future-proof for our next several generations, we have to remove the waste from the value chain around that is involved in digital transformation, that's involved in the work in the enterprise. And if that can happen, it's gonna mean great things in terms of productivity improvements, efficiency improvements and things. But frankly, it'll also have a big impact on sustainability, right? And right now we see, and we saw this during the pandemic, right? People are working so hard. There's mental exhaustion, right? People are just fatigued. We're spending more energy on things, physical energy and mental energy, right? And so to me, that's also part of the opportunity is that $1 trillion opportunity is to future-proof this for our future generations by having a more sustainable approach to moving forward and doing the work and delivering on these technology innovations.
That's awesome. And I think so inspiring, Razat. And I am absolutely honored to be on this journey with you. And I think we're going to have to continue sharing our learnings as we surf these 3 waves. So I think this has been hugely valuable. Thank you so much for joining. And we'll have to have you back and give a progress report on how we're doing on helping these organizations and helping all this value get unlocked. Because I think the vision is clear, and we shouldn't mistake it for a short distance. But I think as you outlined it, I think it is absolutely something we can deliver on. So
thank you so much, Mik. Totally enjoyed the discussion. Thanks for having me.
Thank you to Razat for joining us for this special episode of Mik One. For our listeners who are wondering, yes, the Mik One podcast will definitely continue with a new episode every few weeks, and you can hit subscribe to stay in the loop. For more, follow me in my journey on LinkedIn, Twitter, or using the hashtags Mik+One or Project the Product. You can also follow Razat on LinkedIn. You can also search for Project the Product to get the book, and remember that all author proceeds go to supporting women and minorities in technology. Thanks, stay safe, and until next time.